The European Union is in a moment of crisis. As economic woes pile up, the 28-member bloc of nations faces mass refugee arrivals, terrorism, and the looming threat that one of its key members, the United Kingdom, may be leaving the group in a self-styled Brexit. Joining us now to consider the EU's existential angst, in Irvine, California, Jeffrey Kopstein, chair in the Department of Political Science at the University of California, Irvine. In Boston, Massachusetts, Megan Green, manager and chief economist at Manulife Asset Management. And here in studio, Janice Stein, founding director of the Munk School of Global Affairs and TVO's foreign affairs analyst, and Doug Saunders, international affairs columnist with the Globe and Mail. And it's a pleasure to have you two back in our studio. Jeff Kopstein, long time no see. Good to have you back on our airwaves. And Megan, it's nice to meet you too for the first time here on TVO. Let me read this from a French politician and member of the European Parliament, Rachida Dati, who wrote in The Guardian not too long ago. At a time when the challenges for Europe are multiplying daily, never has politics been so disconnected from reality. Europe tries to lock itself down, and EU member countries are at loggerheads over migrants. The reintroduction of borders, announced by many countries, is doomed to fail for lack of resources. Worse, it tramples on the very principle of solidarity. Europe is on the verge of collapse, yet we can't even see what's happening. Let's get some feedback on this. Jeff, is she right?
Partially. I mean, there's two big flaws. The big flaw, first of all, is that they put into place a refugee regime that is not really, it's only equipped for when they don't have a lot of refugees. That's number one. And the number two is that the EU was kind of built as an elite project from above, and there's not really enough understanding or buy-in from below as to what they're actually trying to do. So they're facing a big crisis of solidarity with each other. Are they going to be just a group of member states, or is there going to be something more than that?
Megan, what's your view on that commentary?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the one thing that's really connecting these different crises that Europe is facing is that all of them are really undermining a willingness to participate. So the politics in Europe are incredibly toxic. And the more we grapple with these crises, particularly the refugee crisis, the more they'll get increasingly toxic. And so when a country gets into trouble, which I think it will as early as this summer with Greece, then it's much harder for politicians to actually row in the same direction, to think about where Europe is going, what the European project means, and to come up with meaningful, difficult, unpopular reforms in terms of institutions to make sure that Europe can get there and that it can be sustained.
Janice, is it that grim?
No. I think it's grim, but I think the conclusion is wrong. So it's grim because, as Megan just said, the institutions don't fit the challenges. And that was true during the Euro crisis. We have a common currency, but we don't have common monetary fiscal policy. We have a huge push out of the Middle East and North Africa into Europe, but we have really a fragile border regime and no consensus about how that burden is going to be shared. But if we take just one step back, I think the Europeans will just muddle along, and it will get more and more difficult and more sclerotic and older, and the institutions will not be rejuvenated, but somehow they're going to muddle through this.
Do you see an appetite for muddling here?
I think there are a set of crises in Europe. There's not one European crisis. There's a coincidence of bad things happening. There's a refugee and migration crisis. There's a terrorism and extremism crisis. There's a set of political crises that all seem to be rooted in the same thing, perhaps after effects of the economic crisis, which, remember, Europe got through quite well. But they're not existential crises. There will be some fraying at the edges, some troubles. A country or two might leave, a country or two might join.
Well, some people might say that's an existential crisis, that you pull at that thread and the whole thing goes.
It's 28 countries. If the path out of these crises without the European Union is much harder to imagine than the path with it. I mean, yes, the open border regime has been temporarily suspended, the Schengen Zone, as it's known.
We're going to get to that.
Yeah, but that's built into it. That's the idea of suspending it during crises was part of its construction.
Megan, let me get you on that. If you pick at that thread, do you think there's an existential crisis here for the EU?
Yeah, I think that the EU is facing much greater challenges right now than it was last summer, for example, when Greece looked like it was about to jump off a cliff and possibly leave. I think particularly the refugee crisis, the deal that they've come up with Turkey is, arguably illegal, more arguably immoral, and most importantly, unimplementable, so can't possibly work. And as long as they can't control their external borders, we'll see more and more internal borders cropping up. And once you've got the end of Schengen, not only are you increasing input costs for countries, which is a headwind economically, but you're also undermining one of the central tenets of the entire European project, which is the free movement of capital, labor, goods, and services. And then on top of that, you've got the Brexit threat. If the UK does end up choosing to leave, and I don't think it will, but I do think it will be close, if the UK does choose to leave, I think a lot of other countries are going to question whether they actually want to be part of this club as well. And if you have other countries leaving, too, you might have a group that stick together. You might have some countries agreeing to a customs union, but it won't be the same European project that we had hoped for at its inception.
Jeff, we're going to put some numbers on the table here, and then I'll get you to comment first on these. According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, more than 1 million migrants and refugees used the sea to make their way to Europe in 2015. About 500,000 of those were Syrians. This year alone, we're only in April, has already seen 138,000 refugees and migrants turn up in Europe. How is the refugee debate, Jeffrey, playing out in Europe at this moment?
Well, it's playing out in different countries differently. But originally these refugees, as you said, about half of them Syrians, would come from Turkey through Greece. From Greece, they would make their way through the Balkans. The problem is that Serbia, Croatia, and Hungary have essentially sealed off their borders, so they can't get to where they want to go, and they want to go to Germany. Germany, on the one hand, wishes to welcome refugees because they created so many refugees before World War II. On the other hand, Merkel really can't face politically the German Chancellor Merkel can't really face politically the problem of so many refugees coming in. So what has been the solution? So the solution is what we've just heard about, this deal. The deal with Greece, the EU, and Turkey. And that's essentially the Germans paying the Turks 6 billion euros, 3 billion now, 3 billion afterwards, to take back, for every one they take back from a refugee sitting in Greece, one will be allowed into Northern Europe, which is where they want to go. This is a really big problem. And it's not only a problem because it's a lot of people, it's also a problem because only about half of these refugees are Syrians, and these Syrians are pretty well educated, and those are the ones that the Germans actually want in. It's like the Canadians' point system. They actually want the better educated ones, the ones that are going to have a better chance of integrating. The rest, they don't really want, and this has created some incredibly perverse incentives. You now have large groups of people, everybody claiming to be Syrian, because Syrian's the good passport. That's what's going to get you north. You don't want to be Afghani, you don't want to be Pakistani, you don't want to be from anywhere else. And so it's created a set of really strange, perverse incentives. And Merkel in Germany is facing giant pressures. Her party is losing popularity. She's, the CDU, the Christian Democratic Union, has done terribly in local elections recently, and she's feeling a lot of pressure. And if she abides by Germany's liberal standards, she might lose her chancellorship. There's a good chance she'll lose her chancellorship over all of this. And if that happens, she's the one really committed to Europe. And if that happens, right, we're not in a European crisis yet of that it's going to fall apart, but it's, we're not that far away from one. When crises happen, they happen quickly. Okay, let's put the spotlight on Turkey for a second because they've got a special role in all this. Janice, the relationship between the EU and Turkey today, how would you characterize it? Well, in an ironic way, it's better now than it's been for years because for 15 years, the Turks knocked on the door of the European Union and were promised that they would be considered, in quote, if their human rights record improved. The reality of it, they were never considered, and the only way we can explain this, Steve, is because of anti-Muslim prejudice. The Europeans did not want millions of Muslims who are Turkish citizens to become part of the European Union. And we got into the debate about the word Christian in the European Union Constitution. Well, the Europeans have now discovered they need the Turks, and they need the Turks because the Turks actually control the choke points along that axis. So here's what they promised. In addition to the money, the 3 billion now, the 3 billion later, they said two other things. Visa-free travel for Turks into Europe, and oh, by the way, we will consider
admitting you to the European Union. Turks have come out of this. This is a win-win. I'd like President Erdogan to negotiate for me next time I have a really big issue, because he's given very little and gotten a lot. But I think, bottom line, the Europeans still don't want Turkey inside the European Union. There's a fundamental contradiction and flaw in this whole arrangement.
Does this force us, though, Doug, to reevaluate the European project, given this new deal that Turkey seems to have made with the rest of the EU?
Well, there's two sides to this. First of all, this is a terrible time for Europe or a European country to be playing ball with Erdogan, Turkey's leader. I mean, he started out as the most European of leaders a decade ago, and he's slowly drifted to authoritarian and now to something that could pretty much be called totalitarian. He's shut down the media and so on. It's bad to be doing it. It's been done in Europe before. There was a migration crisis a decade ago that was solved by Silvio Berlusconi of Italy striking a deal with Muammar Gaddafi of Libya to essentially shoot people if they got on boats and giving him billions of euros in exchange. This is based on a similar reasoning that you can pay the hard guys on the other side of the Mediterranean to stop the flow. In principle, giving people a faint hope of EU membership, giving countries, is a good idea. It worked with Serbia, which was an extremist country in 1999, and because it has some distant hope of EU membership, it's become a good country that plays ball. It's a good idea for Ukraine to give them some sense that they could join down the road. It keeps them from being pulled into the Russian direction and so on. Turkey, a decade ago, it would have been a no-brainer, very European country. The timing on this was terrible. It sends the wrong message to the people in Britain, who we'll talk about soon. It sends bad messages. I don't really know what else the Germans could do. They want to have a bunch of refugees. They don't want to have a bunch of migrants who aren't refugees. I can see the political logic behind it, but boy, bad timing.
Megan, how about you on this Turkish deal?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the only thing worse than this deal failing would be it succeeding, actually. You could end up with the worst possible situation. We forget to think about the refugees in all of this, but actually, if what you do is turn Turkey into a massive holding pen for refugees, then they're neither integrated into society. 6 billion euros isn't going to go very far in terms of integration, but nor are they actually able to return home very easily, because we haven't set up a safe zone in Syria, for example. So you create kind of quasi-permanent refugees, and I think that could easily be a problem further down the line. I mentioned earlier, though, that I thought this deal was possibly illegal. That's because of Turkey being considered a third safe country. Actually, Turkey doesn't sign up to the Geneva Convention for refugees, for all refugees. And so that point is actually hugely questionable, and I think could get, brought into the courts. And so, we could see this deal unravel from that perspective, if not from an implementation perspective.
Doug mentioned an expression a few moments back, the end of Schengen. And we do, I suspect some of our viewers are not going to know what that reference is, so we're going to take a moment here, we're going to put a map up, and we're just going to explain what the Schengen Zone is, because there have been some border controls established in Europe among some countries as a result of the refugee crisis and the terror attacks, and that was not supposed to happen. The so-called Schengen Zone is an area where people were supposed to be able to travel freely, no passports required, 26 countries in total. It's named after that little town in Luxembourg where the agreement was signed. In January, Austria imposed full border control measures on anyone entering its country. France has reinstated tighter border controls after the Paris attacks. Belgium has done likewise. Germany, Denmark, Sweden, they have all introduced border controls as well. And Megan, one wonders now, this Schengen Zone was really quite a, it was an amazing achievement when it was negotiated. Is it, in your view, falling apart now?
Yeah, I think Schengen is absolutely falling apart. I was in Europe a month ago and had my passport checked twice in the Schengen zone in one day. And I think that the only way we can see these national borders fall away again is if Europe does succeed in actually securing its external border. We have fewer refugees coming across the Aegean from Turkey to Greece now because of this deal, but we have more refugees coming in through Italy, for example. The EU can't strike a deal with a failed state like Libya to try to stop the flow there. So I think refugees will end up rerouting. There are other routes that are more treacherous but are still open. And as long as you've got refugees coming in, you don't have the external border secured. And so I think national borders will increasingly go up, particularly given the terrorist attacks that we've seen in Paris last November and more recently Brussels. Unfortunately, I think that that's something that's here to stay, and it's not actually necessarily connected to the refugee crisis. The terrorists in the Brussels attacks grew up in Belgium, for example. They're second-generation immigrants, but it doesn't matter. It's being connected in people's minds.
Janice.
Yeah, so I think there's no question that we're seeing, as you showed on the map, Steve, the reimposition of borders, which breaks down the Schengen Agreement, the capacity to travel freely without your passport. But I think it's also true that the Schengen Zone is not critical to the survival of the European Union.
And it's not part of the European Union.
And it's really not part of the European Union. So it's perfectly conceivable to imagine that the Schengen, and you do it under suspension, that the Schengen Zone is suspended for 4 or 5 years. It may take that long until something sort of quasi-stability returns to a ruined Syria and the pressure eases. But even if it goes, I still don't think that necessarily means the end of the Union. Why is that? Because that's about the mobility of people. If you're a European citizen, if you live in one of the participating countries, it's still going to be easy for you to go cross borders. Ideas are going to move, capital is going to move, technology is going to move. I think it's an exaggeration to say that just because people will face greater obstacles to moving, the whole European project is gone.
I hear you, but Jeffrey, as a symbol of how open and united Europe was, the end of Schengen would be quite symbolic, would it not?
It's not just symbolic. If you put I disagree with what Janice just said, because really the free movement of people is huge within Europe. And it's not just the free movement of people. You know, I lived in Toronto. Go across the border into New York State with a truck. The trucks are lined up for 20 miles long. If you want to actually have the reimposition of real borders in Europe, that's what you're going to have. It's about the free movement of people, the free movement of goods. These go to the very core of European integration. And also, the European leaders get this. Chancellor Merkel recently said that she's committed to reopening these borders as quickly as possible this summer. Now, I'm not sure she's going to be able to do it because, precisely because of what Megan said, the people are, as long as you have a lot of refugees, there is going to be kind of popular pressure to reimpose borders. But we shouldn't underestimate how important, and not only symbolically important, how economically important it is that you can get off a boat or a plane in Portugal and travel all the way to Poland without ever showing your passport. Anybody who's been to Europe lately.
But what would happen, Jeff, if you come to Portugal and you show your passport 4 times? You still move, and if you've got a...
Not when you get to Spain.
Well, but I'm saying,
as soon as you get to Spain, what if you had to show your passport again? I mean, it would be a big deal. And then as soon as you get to France, you show your passport again.
Why?
Well, because there are going to be border controls, and there's trucks moving all over Europe.
Yeah, but we did that before, and we had a European project.
It's the funny thing about the...
Of course.
Go ahead, Doug.
The funny thing about Schengen is that it's not necessary, as Janice says, but it's very popular.
That's
I mean,
right.
it's the aspect of European unification that European citizens actually like. They like the fact that you could drive from France into Germany basically without knowing that you've crossed the border. There's a tiny sign somewhere, and that sort of thing. It's very popular. Suspensions like this were built into the structure of the Schengen Agreement 2 decades ago. And the idea that it could be suspended temporarily was part of it. They did it in 2011 in many countries due to the Arab Spring. I was shocked to go from Italy to France and have to show a passport. It's no big deal to have to do that. It is popular, so it will probably remain despite temporary suspensions. Remember, this is a refugee crisis. These happen from time to time in Europe. There was a big one in the 1990s that caused even bigger political tensions. This one will probably be bigger than that one somewhat, but these are periodic things every couple decades.
Megan, let's get you on this.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, Schengen is the free movement of labor, capital, goods, and services. And so we've already seen input costs in Germany rise off the back of temporary border reimposition. Germany's supposed to be the growth engine of Europe, and its supply chain is well integrated through Central and Eastern Europe. So if you do see trucks lining up for 20 hours at the border, that's a huge headwind for the European economy. And let's not forget, Europe isn't exactly growing like gangbusters right now, even though the ECB has its pedal to the metal. We might have growth of around 1.5% in Europe now when times are good. So that kind of headwind could be detrimental for Europe.
Let me put another issue on the table here, because as if the refugee crisis in Europe weren't enough, it is looking at another crisis, namely the United Kingdom potentially leaving. There's going to be a referendum on this. They are calling it the Brexit. And let's quote Yanis Varoufakis here, the former finance minister in Greece, who's been on this program a number of times, talking about Britain's potential exit from the EU. Sheldon, the clip, please.
If we had not created the European Union and the Eurozone, we should not consent to its creation. Is that clear? I think that's straightforward.
But once we have created today, but as they currently exist.
But once we have created it, disassembling it, dismembering it, fragmenting it, is not going to take us to where we would have been had we not created. It's going to throw us into a terrible abyss.
Megan, let me get you to comment on that. A terrible abyss, he says. Do you agree?
If the UK were to choose to leave the EU, I think it would be really detrimental for the UK, but it would also be hugely detrimental for the EU. There was a referendum in the Netherlands, for example, on a trade agreement with Ukraine that got defeated. But, I think if the UK chose to actually leave, the Netherlands would be the next country to choose whether to participate in this project, and countries might start peeling off, particularly now that you have anti-European parties who are doing pretty well in most European countries.
Doug, what does an EU without Great Britain look like?
It would be very awkward for the EU. It would be catastrophic for Britain.
Catastrophic?
Two reasons. First of all, because almost everything in British economic, political, and domestic life is intertwined with those neighboring countries. It would be very, very hard to extricate that. Certainly, as the exit side, the leave side of the referendum argues, they'd be able to negotiate new relationships with those countries outside the EU, but it would take 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, during which that would be the only issue in British politics, media, and life, and so on. They would have to shut things down in between for no gain. There's nothing to be gained by not being part of this political and economic union. There's a huge downside. Every British Prime Minister who comes into office, they all start a little skeptical. They quickly learn everything that crosses their desk has to do with their EU partners.
Having said that, Janice, one wonders if the refugee crisis were not happening in Europe right now, whether the steam behind the leave side would be as strong.
Well, I think there are two factors there's actually three, believe it or not, that are playing into the steam. I'm concerned that there's a lot of steam here, and referendum politics, as we know very well in this country, are just unpredictable. Yeah. The only encouraging thing, by the way, it's always harder to get people to vote yes in referendum than it is to vote no. There's an inertial bias. So that's encouraging. But there's three things. There's a refugee crisis, and there's been a history in Britain. There were stories of so-called Polish plumbers that predate this. So we're tapping into something that's very live in British politics. The second big one, believe it or not, is the security crisis, which we haven't really talked about. But the attacks in Brussels and in Paris. And the reason they're so concerning to the Brits is not because they happen, because the Brits have been very good at this. It's because the institutional response in Europe has been appalling. There's no other way to describe it. The failure of the institutions at every level to respond in the most minimal way is truly appalling, and that plays into British public opinion. And the third thing is the special status of London, which Brits feel very strongly about, and there are a whole series of issues that David Cameron negotiated, but it is about preserving the financial hegemony of London. From the perspective of Brits, they are global. They're a global part, far larger than Europe. You feed all these three themes together, Steve, and this is a tough debate inside Britain right now.
Jeffrey, could the departure of Great Britain from the EU result in another country in the EU playing an even greater role than it is right now, in your view?
Possibly. I mean, the thing, I agree with everything that's been said so far. The one wrinkle I would add to it is that within the EU, right, well, you have to understand Britain, of course, is not a member of the Euro nor a member of Schengen, so that wouldn't change, right? But what Britain is in the EU, it is the most Atlanticist partner within the European Union. Because of the special relationship between Great Britain and the United States, that ties Europe to the EU, to the extent that the EU has any foreign policy, much more clearly. If Britain left the EU, it would be even more of a Franco, but really German condominium right now. Now, Now, the good news is that the Germans are pretty Atlanticists themselves. The other interesting thing, I was thinking about this before coming here, is the relationship in the Middle East. I mean, Great Britain is one of the most pro-Israel members of the EU. Now, Germany is as well, but Great Britain adds to that weight. And so that's another wrinkle. Certainly, you're right. The premise of your question is completely correct, that were Britain not part of the EU, the center of balance would change. But you have to remember, as this has already been said already, Britain joined the EU late. It's never joined the euro. It's never joined Schengen. So there's always been a kind of a reticence there, and it was never really viewed by France, and nor does it wish to be viewed by France, nor does France wish to view it as a full member. And so its departure would be horrible for Great Britain. I mean, there's no upside at all. But for the EU itself, it would lead to a kind of a rebalancing. I think the premise of your question is correct.
Megan, if we look at that rebalancing, and if Great Britain were to leave the EU, who picks up the slack?
I mean, Germany is already running the show as the biggest economy in the EU, and so I think that would only be more the case, which is a problem in terms of how we have a response to these various crises, particularly the economic and financial crisis. The whole response has been for everyone to look more like Germany, and that would just continue. And unfortunately, that raises off any kind of economic growth in the region. So I think it would boost Germany's hegemony. Now, Germany is a reluctant leader, unfortunately, in all of this. But of course, one of the points of the entire European project to begin with was to try to actually create some kind of coalition so that it wasn't just Germany running the show in Europe. So we would be undermining that. Certainly. I would just pick up on one point that was just made about the UK's power in the EU. The government in the UK did a study on how effective the UK was in actually getting its way in Brussels, and it's actually very effective. So the idea that the UK isn't a full member, I think, is a real misperception. Actually, the UK has quite a prominent seat at the table, and if it were to leave the EU, it would still want to trade with the EU, and so would consequently have to sign up to all the regulation, but it wouldn't have that seat at the table anymore. So, you know, if you're not on the table, then you're on the menu. I think it would be really detrimental for the UK, but the UK does have a big seat.
Well,
The awkward thing about the EU is that it's a mess. It's perpetually dysfunctional.
Yeah.
It's a weird form of democracy. That often seems removed from the people. But if you shut it down, you would pretty much have to reinvent exactly the same thing over again.
Well, with one exception, though, and it's actually something we haven't talked about. The original impetus behind the EU was to make sure it wasn't an economic imperative, it was a political imperative, and it was embed Germany in Europe and make sure that Germany never went to war again against its European neighbors.
Mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished, right? This project. So I think from that perspective, the fundamental drivers of all this are less intense. There's no prospect.
So tell me this, Jeffrey, I could be wrong on this, Jeffrey, but I think Boris Johnson's one of the most popular politicians in Great Britain these days. Boris Johnson's in favor of the Brexit. He's come out against his prime minister of his own party, the Conservatives, and said Britain should go. If all of you say so categorically that it makes eminent sense to stay, what's he looking at?
Well, it's always popular to dump on Europe because people have kind of figured out that regulations come down from Brussels, and nobody really elects what's going on in Brussels, right? They're delegated from the elected governments of the states themselves. And then they kind of issue these regulations, directives, that have to be implemented into national law. And Boris Johnson, like other European leaders, have figured out that there's a kind of a democratic deficit. And this is an easy play within politics. But I think Janice is correct here, and others who've said this are correct too. The original purpose of the European Union, you know, its original name was back in 1951, was the European Coal and Steel Union. Right. Why coal and steel? Because those are the things you need to make the implements of war. And so it was designed to make sure that that France and Germany never fight a war again. And in that, it's been hugely successful. You can dump on the procedures and the democratic deficit all you want, but unless you've got a replacement for that, ultimately, you've got nothing to say.
Doug, how long did you live in London for?
Decade.
A decade. So you know this place pretty well.
Quite recently. I've lived there more often than not. Boris has been my mayor. David Cameron's been my prime minister. And I will be voting in the referendum because I'm a British citizen.
And wouldn't
yes.
you say, Doug, that Boris Johnson has a domestic political agenda too? And this is a great
Well,
way
he
to
might-
get at his own prime minister.
he
A
might
lot
have
of this
a little
is
bit.
a lot of this is tied up with it, and building up fear has become a tool for political success in Britain. It undeniably has.
Answer this question. You know this country so well. Can you imagine them leaving? Polls are pretty close right now.
Well, I can imagine it.
Yeah.
I mean, the British determination to be an island has been a powerful force throughout the country's history, even though it's been the most globalized, not often in a friendly way, multicultural country throughout its entire history. It's always been an amalgam of four nations. It's always been a place that's very European without knowing it. But there's always like a London fog of confusion about foreigners, people with different colored skin, violent stuff, rabies coming from dogs in France, terrorists coming from somewhere, that sort of thing. It's all sort of fogs together in the tabloid headlines and on the streets. Even though it's a bunch of things that are kind of unrelated, it all feels like one thing. Everything out there is dangerous. Let's shut the doors. That's a popular impetus. I wouldn't bet on the horse of Britain leaving Europe, but it's not impossible. It's popular politics.
How will you vote?
Oh, to stay.
But actually, how? Do you go somewhere here in Canada to vote?
Yes, I will be, and I don't generally believe that non-residents should vote in elections. I think voting should be by residency and not by citizenship. But
Having said that, you're going to vote anyway.
This is crucial to my status as a European citizen.
But can you do it online, or do you go to a?
You cast a postal ballot to the
Okay.
council in which you're registered. Yes, if you're a British citizen watching this, you should go do that.
Gotcha. Megan, go ahead.
Yeah, just to jump in, because David Cameron's also been my prime minister and Boris, my mayor, and I'm also a UK citizen. I was in London for 10 years as well. And when you're in the UK, the prevailing arguments for why the UK maybe should leave are all very local. It's all about, your kid going to school and not having, fluent English speakers in their class, or about health provisions, so the NHS being quasi-bankrupt, and the impact of EU citizens coming in on that. So it's all very local issues, and actually more, very reasonable people that I know are actually in favor of the UK leaving the EU, so it will end up being very close. The one thing I think really could swing it towards the outvote winning would be a terrorist attack. I do think that, as much as I can make all these sophisticated arguments about why, as an economist, it's a no-brainer for the UK to stay in, Joe Sixpack on the street is really mostly interested in the migration question and the security issues, so that could end up swinging it before the June 23rd vote.
Janice, there's always the possibility, as they call it in the States, of an October surprise, right?
There really is.
And then what?
Well, it's very concerning. It's very concerning because we have, it's astounding to me, frankly. And it's not news either. We have terrible, terrible intelligence sharing among the core members of the European Union. If you just think about this, Australia, Canada, the UK, New Zealand, and Australia share far more intelligence in a timely way than members of the European Union do. And right now there's a push to reform, and where's that coming from? The United States is pushing, and how's this going to work? France is going to share intelligence information with Washington. Germany's going to share intelligence information with Washington at advanced level, but they're not going to share intelligence information with each other. That tells you how dysfunctional security arrangements are. And if you're strategic and you would like to encourage the Brits to leave Europe, there's an obvious opportunity here to change the game in the remaining time.
Speaking of the remaining time, we got about a minute left here, Jeff. Let me go to you on this. Usually predictions 5 years down the road are about as good as throwing darts at a board, but what the heck, let's try this anyway. Where do you see the EU in 5 years?
Well, as my old dissertation advisor, a Hungarian, said, he said, prediction is very difficult, especially prediction of the future.
Exactly.
The EU in 5 years, I think the muddling through. I mean, the EU's constitution, if you will, and it's not a real piece of paper constitution, but the EU, the sets of rules and laws and customs and procedures, they've been developed over a very long time. And that's not going to change anytime soon. It might roll back a little bit, it might roll forward a little bit, but I think it will be around because people will see that it's absolutely necessary. There's no alternative to what they've built up.
Good. Thanks, everybody, for your participation in this discussion tonight. Jeffrey Kopstein at the University of California in Irvine. Megan Green, Manulife Asset Management, on the line from Boston, Mass. Go Red Sox. Janice Stein, the founding director of the Monk School, and Doug Saunders with the Globe and Mail. Okay, them too. Thanks, everybody.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.